Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
You're my favorite interviewer.
So we're talking about the Meander book today?
Yeah.
Again, welcome, Sangha. It's our pleasure to present Keisei, Andrew Dietz, and Hojo Sensei, talking about his new book, The Original Frontier. So I'm passing the virtual ball over to Keisei and Hojo Sensei. Gassho, everyone.
I'm Hojo, and that's Keisei.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I was saying to Sensei over lunch that, you know, as difficult as the pandemic has been for everybody and for practice in many ways, this has been a wonderful benefit, the opportunity for us to get together on a regular basis virtually is something that I hope and expect will continue. It just adds so much richness, these hybrid opportunities where we can be in person and online both. And that said, I hadn't been back here to sit in quite some time, and you could just, I feel so uplifted to be here. Also uplifting is this book, The Original Frontier.
Oh, nice segue, nice segue.
Like that? How about that?
Nice segue.
So it is extremely difficult to write a book, no less one that is several hundred pages and published by a significant publishing house. Congratulations. And
couldn't have done it without you.
And I know you've got another one in the works, so you're a glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
But so one of the things you write about in this book, and we'll talk about the original frontier in a minute and that concept, but one of the things you talk about is experience versus expression. And I know the emphasis in our practice is on experience, but this is a significant expression. What led you to, why do this? Why the need to do this?
That is a question.
Yes, it's a question. I thunked it up myself.
Yeah. In the beginning, I think in the introduction, I talk about that a little bit, why add another book to the pile that's out there on Zen. And the several reasons, I think, over the years in teaching and studying, teaching and inseparable, it became clear that people coming in the door had an awful lot of preconceptions or misconceptions about Zen. Giving talks, the response that you get from people tend to help you home in on where the confusions lie. And I was giving talks around certain of the subjects that are in the book and in the second book as well. And people in the audience began saying, encouraging me, that you need to write the book, you need to write the book. So I had no opportunity, none of us could today, to read everything, that's written about Zen, and especially now and in English. When I first started in the 60s, you literally could. You could read everything that was published in English. Take you a while, but you could do it. Now it's impossible. And so I had no way of knowing for myself, from personal experience of reading, whether anything like this is out there or not. But the feedback I got from the reading groups, we put it through at least 3 reading groups. When I say it, I meant the original manuscript, which was about twice the size of this book. It became pretty clear that this was unusual. It wasn't the typical or characteristic of the other books that are out there. So it seemed that my experience in particular, coming from a background of design, creativity, teaching, design thinking, The only other person I could think of, and I mentioned in the book, is John Dido Laurie, who came from a advertising background, and he has the 8 gates of creativity that he's put together.
And talented photographer, fine art photographer as well.
Talented fine art photographer. He was the only person that I could think of that had a similar background. And so I thought maybe writing from a perspective of design thinking, the practical side of Zen for the rest of us, how do we really make it work, and moving away from the impression I was getting from responses as well as my own reading that we have this kind of a Puritan ethic relative to, quote, religion in the United States, and Zen was getting sucked into that kind of holy kind of presentation or idea about it, even though it has some radical and pithy things to say. I got the feeling that somehow we were kind of missing the point of what Zen is about. And so I tried to capture that in this book in terms of a personal level, in the personal sphere. How can you make sense of Zen? How can you make it fit into a very sort of un-Zen-like life that you may feel that you're living? And the second book is an extension of that into how do I see it fitting into the culture at large? And those, when I sent it to the first publisher, they sent it back and said, I think you got more than one book here. So I went in and took it apart, and I basically took out all the sections that were talking about more social implications, although the tail end of this book goes into that a little bit, kind of as a teaser to lead into the next book. And it fell apart in 50-50, basically. Now the next book is only 100 pages or so, a little over 100 pages, so it's briefer than this. But it's an attempt to take this idea of how did Zen originally work? How did it work for Buddha in India? How did it work for the more sort of, chop wood, carry water, down to earth ancestors in China, and for Dogen in Japan and so forth? And so how can it work for us today? How does it work on a personal level? And then how does it fit into the culture on a societal level? So I was encouraged by the response that I got. And I think if I'd written anything earlier in my so-called Zen career, I might be embarrassed by it by now. But I've had the good fortune to have apply a lot of group process to the development of the content. And I think that's sort of taken out a lot of the quirkiness that may have been there if I'd simply written it in my ivory tower and somehow got it published.
Well,
so I applied a design thinking process too.
Yeah. Well, the words original and frontier are interesting in their own right, no less together. But original, is about originality and creativity in some ways.
Yep.
I know that's not what it means in the context of original frontier, but
I'll take that though. I think that's okay.
Yeah. And so what I heard you say earlier, which I think comes through in the book clearly, is I think is you, fortunately for all of us, and that is a very down-to-earth, practical, and approachable Zen, which stands in some ways in contrast to, I do think, what feels like exists in some circles, which is a sort of a holier than thou approach, which is antithetical in a lot of ways.
It can be a little off-putting, and it tends, I think it's a sign of respect on the part of the authors that they are treating Zen and the teachings of Buddha, Dharma, etc., with such high degree of reverence. But unfortunately, in tone and in other ways, it comes off in a standoffish way, maybe, that since I've got the outfit, I've got the robe, I know what this is all about, and by definition, you don't,
Mm.
because you don't have the robe. And the last thing I think we want to do here, Matsuoka Roshi said, Zen will find its rebirth in America. He said it's dead in Japan, which most of the early pioneers coming to America said. One version or another of that same theme. But it would find its rebirth here. And primarily, you know, Americans are do-it-yourselfers. We're not pretend monastics, most of us. And so it's primarily going to find its new flowering in the lay practice of all people, as it eventually became in all the countries of origin. It just became part of the woodwork, like Catholicism in Italy. So I think we're very fortunate to be in the first 50 to 100 years of the development of Zen here. We've gone to Japan and seen sort of the weight of the custom and history of it in the huge monasteries and so forth. It would be difficult to be a Zen priest in Japan. Here it's kind of a liberating thing for us. And we continue to honor and respect the tradition, the look, etc. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I think we need to reinvent Zen. You and I both come from creative, innovative backgrounds. So if you think of just the idea of innovation, innovation doesn't always, or never actually comes up with something brand new. It's more a way of repositioning something in a more appropriate way or more appropriate niche in society. All technology is like that. Technology seems to be, what's the word, cut off or surpassed by new technology. But actually what happens is everything, including books, just kind of shift gears and find another niche in the society. I think that's a little bit what I mean by reinventing Zen. Everybody has to invent it for themselves in their own personal life. But I think we as a culture need to reinvent Zen for how it actually fits in this culture. And that's what the second book is about.
One of the things you talk about, I can't remember if it's in this book, but we've talked about it before often, and that's this My Dear Aunt Sally, in the creative process, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction is the last one.
Right.
And, you know, I think it's interesting that that last piece is what we drop off. And to drop off the trappings of Zen is to come back to that in a different sense, the original frontier of our practice.
Yep.
But, you know, what I find especially helpful about the book is its accessibility to those who are new, and that idea of breaking through the perhaps false expectations people have when they approach Zen. And there's a line in there about Superman going into the phone booth and stripping it off, and all of a sudden, you know, there's an enlightened being that comes out.
Right, stands revealed as Buddha.
And, you know, when people come to you for the first time to talk about Zen and think about practicing, how do you help them manage that expectation of transformation?
Well, the first thing to understand is where they're coming from. So I typically interview, especially newcomers, and we do that as a formal approach. And in our group process, we interview the newcomers first to find out where they're coming from, and then try to come back and meet them where they are. The idea of Buddha ducking into the phone booth like Clark Kent is it's not quite that far out in terms of a concept, because one of the Chinese poems says, like practice secretly, like a fool, like an idiot, you know, keep your practice hidden. Don't make a big public deal of it. That's Clark Kent. He didn't let anybody know he's Superman. Newcomers to Zen, and nowadays we have fewer and fewer who are ranked newcomers who have not been exposed to it. Even younger people nowadays in their 20s and 30s and even younger have had some exposure. We're seeing the third generation now where their parents have been into Zen, or even their grandparents have been into Zen. and many are exposed to it in school, in the university setting in particular. So we have fewer and fewer what you could regard as ranked newcomers. But for all of them, it's the same thing. It, as you said, as you were saying, the original means they have to make it original for themselves. You have to understand where they're coming from in order to try to help them understand how it could fit into their life and in a way that's not alien, archaic, etc., but more modern. Matsuoka Roshi said Zen is always contemporary. But even to use the word Zen now puts it in a special category where everybody thinks they already know what that is, and they're either interested in it or not interested in it. So Dogen, even in his time, 13th century Japan, he said, don't call it Zen. That's not Zen. He says, just Buddhism. You know, Zen is actually a misnomer for Chan, which means jhana. And Zen meditation is certainly not the traditional contemplation. But back to your original on frontier, the frontier is the meme we can associate with in America and probably all over the world now. We have the, you know, Star Trek and the final frontier, the frontiers of the oceans and so forth. And we're going, looks like we're going to Mars again. We're going to, it's to the moon, to Mars. So the frontier is alive and well in the American psyche, and probably more and more influence around the world. And as American culture has more influence, sometimes not always positive, around the world. So the idea of the frontier being entering uncharted territory, still being in your world and real, but you know, nobody's been here before. One of these chapters following the sages as guides, meaning they, Buddha and the others have gone into this original frontier of mind and blazed the trail for us to a great degree. So that's pretty much what Zen comes down to, is guidelines and the map of the territory for you to enter into this yourself. Most of us are not satisfied with staying home and hearing, you know, letters sent back from the front lines or tales from the frontier. We want to go there. We want to go to there, as we say, and do that. We want it for ourselves. So Zazen, the meditation that we practice, when I was first exposed to it, what hit me like a ton of bricks was there's actually something to do here. This is not just about reading or listening or talking about ideas. This is a way to do this. There's something to do. So as do-it-yourselfers, I think Americans are particularly well integrated or oriented towards the whole idea of Zen, which is studying is fine, reading books, studying the Dharma. You can get some pointers there. But unless you're using the application, unless you're doing the actual meditation practice, it's like reading the documentation for a computer application. It doesn't make any sense unless you're actually using it. So I think this is appealing to Westerners, Americans perhaps in particular. And so our problem in propagating Zen, talking about it, presenting it, is presentation. This is a design, this is something you learn in design. You might have the greatest product, the greatest service, the greatest program in the world, but you know, nobody knows it. And so you have all these best kept secrets about it. So how do we present Zen? Zen you're a branding expert, so Zen from a branding perspective, you could not have a better brand than Soto Zen. It you know, 2,500 years of refinement, and it has a very good positive image in people's minds. So the problem is not what it is that we're selling. One of Gio Kennett Roshi's books from Shasta Abbey was titled Selling Water by the River. We're selling something that people already have, right? Water by the river. It's how we present it. We either get in the way or we get out of the way. And so all of this is about a user's manual for, you can pick this up at any point, read it, go do some meditation, come back and read it some more. And I suggest one way to read it is nonlinear. If you just pick it up and pop it open to a random page and look. So I'm looking at the subheads: becoming supersaturated, made from concentrate, and perception is not reality. So one of those might grab you, and you just read that section and then go
it's
sit.
very accessible that way, because you could, I mean, while it all flows together, you could pick any one piece of it.
Yep.
And there are some pieces that stand out to me because, and I wanted to ask you about them. One was Dietz, which was a company that you had encountered in your career.
It sounds like dialects in the sense of dialectics, but it's DYLEX, an acronym. They were a retail firm out of Canada. And the acronym actually stands for damn your lousy excuses.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I'm not making this up.
I know, I love that.
And in their case, they were just promoting a corporate culture of not allowing for failure, or at least making excuses about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about failure and success and how you have to fail to succeed, et cetera, and so forth. But I'm applying that to Zen or really any other form of meditation. What are the lousy excuses we have, why we can't do it? The very first one I take up is probably the most common: I don't have the time. There's no time. So I go through, discussion on how that is really kind of a category error. All you really have is time. Mm-hmm. It's a choice of, am I going to spend it in meditation or watching TV or whatever else? So if you deconstruct the argument, that you see the absurdity of the idea that you don't have time for meditation. And at the end of each of these excuses, a little dissertation on the excuse, I put it, try this. So I give you a little exercise to do and to see if that helps you get over that particular hump. Then the next one may be, it's too painful, whatever it happens to be.
So I started.
That's a long chapter. There's lots of excuses.
Well, it is. And there are, I asked you in the beginning about expression versus experience, and expression in the form of this book is encouragement. It's your expression to encourage people to sit. Part of that is getting rid of excuses. The other longer chapter is about senses.
Yeah, deconstructing the senses.
And in fact, that's the longest chapter in the book, as far as I could tell. And I wanted you to just talk a little bit about that. Why you decided to spend so much time on that particular topic, and how you want us to kind of receive that or think about it.
Okay, there's a couple of reasons around this. I think that's a very good inquiry. I was a little hesitant. Anybody should be, to do any descriptive writing around their experience in Zen. And there's two reasons why you don't see much of that. I think I mentioned the Shurangama Sutra in there and Hakuin's writings as standout examples where they are very descriptive. But most of the writings around Zen and Buddhism are not at all descriptive of a person's actual experience, say in meditation. And what I discovered in my meditation is that it does not cleanly go through the senses as they are listed in the six senses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, and so forth. In fact, it starts with the body, right? The body resists, it hurts, your legs hurt, it's difficult. We say Zazen should be the comfortable way, but you should expect to experience a great deal of discomfort in getting used to it and settling into it. It's the stretching of the tendons and so forth. And so we confront body first in the actual practice of meditation. eyes don't come first. Vision does not come first. Now, I'm highly trained in vision. That's a big part of my profession. So I'm maybe more acutely sensitive or aware of vision. Some of you may be trained in music, so you may be more acutely aware of the auditory sense. But in that particular chapter, I make the point that going into meditation, it's sort of backwards from the way the senses are outlined and talked about, just as the Eightfold Path starts out with right view and right thought. Well, we don't start out with right view. We start out with right meditation, which is the back end of the path. Hopefully we evolve towards right view. So part of this expression is to try to counter some confusions that may arise out of the sort of literature that we have trying to express this truth, and some of the confusions that may arise out of that. But back to your original point, yes, we live in a culture in which everybody's rushing into print about everything. I mentioned one author of a book. He goes on his very first retreat, and then he writes a bestseller about it. He's a best-selling writer, so he has those connections and he can get somebody to publish it and so on. But even in the book, he talks about this one teacher at a retreat. He said, "Don't write a book now. You'll just confuse people." And so everybody is putting expression over experience. Not everybody, but the culture in general does. And I'll go into that a little bit in the second book, where you have all these very young people who, I heard a 10-year-old on one of the singing shows, actually was sent to me by a friend, sing Nessun Dorma, this 10-year-old girl. And it just, tearjerker, it's just so beautiful. But at 10 years old, you don't have the kind of experience that you're expressing, right? So many aspects of our culture like that, expression over experience. Zen is the flip of that. Experience comes first, even if you're mute, even if you are incoherent, even if you, right? So many of Buddha's disciples, again, in the Shurangama Sutra, they made the point around Buddha's disciples that they were not necessarily eloquent. They did not necessarily have the ability to express, but they had the experience. And so just living around them, you could sort of pick it up by osmosis. Expression or experience is number one in Zen. Expression, a far distant second, maybe, but may not be important. But in this case, I'm doing my best to express a different take on Zen that I hope I came by honest, because it came from my background and training, and I hope it works for people who read the book.
Well, it succeeds in a lot of ways, but in one way that I think is especially important for any writer is your voice is clear throughout. And those of us who have known you for a while, which is many folks online, you will hear Sensei's voice through the words. April, do we have time to take questions?
I'll take that as a compliment.
It's meant as a compliment, yeah, because your voice is, it's particularly straightforward, engaging, and entertaining. So let's take some questions if we have any, or comments or thoughts.
I'm going to put in a plug. Please write a review. Post it on Amazon.com. We need 35. We've only got 20 or 20 some. Zenku's hand went up.
Zenku.
Yes, Zenku.
Thank you, Hojo and Keisei, for the interview. Really appreciate it. When I first knew that Sensei was going to put this book together, it's been several years in the works. And the idea of original frontier was, is not a new concept for the title of this book, but I always thought it was the perfect title. And for me, what hit me right away about it was that you know, this is the original problem of humanity. This is our original issue. And so there's a lot of frontiers, but when we fundamentally stop and look, what is the basic issue? This is the original frontier. And, you know, it's like what the Buddha found around life is suffering. That was like defining what the original frontier is. And Dogen with the Genjo Koan, expressing what is the nature of life. Anyway, that's what struck me about it, and I thought it was really great. But Sensei, is that really what you felt as well, or was that, I know you've expressed some slightly different perspectives on it, which I think is also nice about the title, that it brings in a lot of different notions. But anyway, that's what really struck me.
Yeah, to extend the metaphor a bit by talking about the fact that with any frontier, you have to leave familiar territory and enter into the unknown. You can always come back, but there will be a turning point where it's just as hard to get back as it is to just keep going. And that's what they found, I'm sure, in exploring the West. I mean, once you made it over the Rocky Mountains with the Conestogas by dragging them up on ropes, were you really going to go back? I don't think so, you know. So the metaphor, I think, is extendable. But what you're pointing out, that this is the original problem, I think is very astute. I'm not sure I get into that in great detail. In the second book, I go into problem definition, problem solving as design kind of thinking approaches to anything. You know, they say if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So it's not always the best approach. But problem solving in design, at least, is based on problem definition. If you don't have a full definition of the problem, whatever solution you try to come up with is probably going to fall short. So the thrust in design thinking, I think, is similar in Zen. What we're really doing is defining the problem. You know, the theory is that if you fully define the problem of life exists, however you want to express it, if you fully define the problem, the solution will be inherent in the definition. So rather than try to leap to a solution, like people say, I want my life to be better. I want to be a better person. And we say, and I mentioned in the book, don't try to apply Zen to your life. You'll probably screw it up. Apply yourself to Zen. Don't worry, it will apply itself to your life. So it's a little bit of a head shift. It's Dogen's backward step, you know, more like that. Is that what you're getting at, Zenku? That kind of thing?
Yeah. Thank you, Sensei.
And I see Amy's hand up.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to hear this discussion. And I do find your book very helpful. Our Sangha's working through it, and the try this exercises I'm really enjoying a lot, because stuff does come up on the cushion and it's suggestions for working with that. So I appreciate that. My question, I'm so curious about the last line of the book, which reads, the takeaway, do thou likewise, come home to Zen. And I was struck by that because, for one thing, when I did my initial interview coming in to visit the Falmouth Sangha and asked why, one of the few things I could say was, it feels like coming home. But the do thou likewise is also happens to be a reference to scripture and the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I was surprised. I was surprised by that as a last line, in that the symbol of American culture, the kinds of tone around independence and iconoclastic spirit, to end with a scriptural feel was surprising to me. And I'm wondering what that was like for you, that last end.
Thank you. I think that's a very insightful observation. You think of Buddha's last words, they were something like, they're translated variously, but something like, don't take my word for this, check it out for yourself, right? So, I don't know if I mentioned in that book, but somewhere that Jesus is considered a bodhisattva. So any friction between the religions, and I go into that more detail in the second book, is really not on the side of Zen. Zen is very, not syncretistic. We're not trying to create a one world religion, but very inclusive. And so I don't think it's really inappropriate to have an expression like that. Come home to Zen, many people say they have this feeling. I did when I first started practicing Zen in Chicago in the 60s. I think probably the very first time I went to the temple and sat in meditation, it was familiar. And that's strange, right? There's an expression in design, creativity is making the familiar strange. So the idea of sameness and difference, you know, as in the famous poem, Sandokai, harmony between something we call same and something we call different, I think is very fitting here. That people always remark, many, not always, that this seems strangely familiar to me, even though I haven't been doing sitting in this, I haven't been doing meditation in my life. So we have this expression in Zen called attribute merit from past lives. So we'll jokingly say, well, you probably were a monk in the last life or a nun or whatever, you know. So it's familiar because it's racial memory, or it's karmic memory carrying over. So I think those are some of the reasons that I chose to end the book that way. And as Keisei was saying, it's the whole book is basically an invitation to try this, you know.
One of the lines that caught me was the singularity of Zen. Oh, my mic's off. Okay.
No, you're on. We can hear you.
It just slipped.
That was another line that came to me, the singularity of Zen, altogether being not two, not one, but altogether being not two.
Yeah, it's another borrowed expression from physics. We can speak of the singularity of an experience that we never experienced anything else like that in our life. First time we got on a roller coaster, probably singular type of experience. But singularity in physics has this sort of ultimate character to it, that once this collapse begins on a neutron or on a star and becomes a neutron star and so forth, and it's collapsing inward. And even just the idea of collapsing inward doesn't make any sense. You have to go from the micro to the macro to the microcosmos to even understand what they're talking about, because it's somehow the space between the particles is collapsing. So it's like collapsing into the most dense possible form of matter or energy that you can imagine. And we can't really even imagine it. People like Stephen Hawking and Einstein maybe could imagine it. But they say all the known laws of physics break down. It doesn't mean they go away. Hawking's evaporation, or I can't remember what he called it, the energy coming out of a black hole, originally thought nothing comes out, everything goes in, nothing comes out. And you pass an event horizon. So I found that a compelling image. And again, I'm trained in imagery. Most of my thought process, I would say, is on the level of image. Somebody in music, most of their thought process may be on the level of sound or in the medium of sound, you might say. So just imagining that what you read described in words, and now they're actually producing images of them with our advanced telescopes. You can't really see the black hole, but you see the cluster of energy around it. It occurred to me that our meditation is like that at its ultimate extension when it becomes shikantaza, meaning no subject, no object. That's a kind of collapse. That's a collapse of duality. We don't assert that it's one, we say not two. But if you think of that process of sort of merging and collapsing inward of its own mass, I think that's a pretty cogent and coherent description of what actually occurs in Zazen. All the known laws all the laws that we know anyway, right, of our conscious reality break down as this process occurs. But it's not something we should fear. We're just returning to where we came from. This is called refuge. We're taking refuge. Go ahead.
Please.
Yeah. Oh,
Sensei,
I know we want to leave enough time for sitting today, and we've done a lot of talking, but before we do, are there final questions or final frontiers?
Seiyu has a question.
yeah, Sensei, thank you so much. I appreciate, and I think we all do, that having you actually speaking about your book, the motivation that you had for doing it, and your perspective, I think, would really adds a lot to it. So I'm looking forward to it. I was wondering, you mentioned reinventing Zen was an important part of understanding that you put into that you brought to the book. And isn't the focus on reinventing Zen more a focus on adjusting the culture to fit the ideas we have about Zen? Isn't that what died in Japan? Not the essence of Zen.
Yeah, a more accurate word in terms of right and expression. Writing, I think, in our lives, to experience Zen, we have to, in a sense, reinvent it. We can't take it as being what somebody else tells it is, us it is. We can't take a conception of it. We have to reinvent it in our personal experience. But when it comes to expression, we're actually, a word we would use in branding would be repositioning Zen. We're repositioning Zen to the public. You know, first positioning is like Xerox's copiers, right? And you get first positioning in a given category in the public's mind by being firstest with the mostest and maintaining your position in marketing. So I think your point is well taken. By writing a book about it, I'm not reinventing Zen at all.
But
I'm simply repositioning it.
But that repositioning, isn't that more focused on the form than it is on that which does not change enough?
Yeah, it's adapting to the culture. It's the same thing that Bodhidharma did in carrying it to China, or Matsuoka Roshi did in bringing it to America, or Dogen did in bringing Soto Zen back to Japan. It's readapting it to the culture. If you read the teachings from Shakyamuni on down, each of the ancestors, based on their own personal experience of the essential truth or center of Zen, the singularity, had to then, observe and test out whether the traditional way of presenting it was really working in their context. When it moved to China, it had to change. When it moved to Japan, it had to change. But the person changing it had the authority to do that based on their own experience.
Is it not done more organically than it is intellectually?
I don't think in Zen you can separate the two. The old poem says, to move in the one way, do not reject even the world of senses and ideas. Indeed, accepting them fully is identical with true enlightenment. So on one level, yes, expression can get in the way of experience. But if you put experience first, then expression is one with experience.
Expression in the case of a book like this is an invitation to experience.
Yes.
Exactly. It's not my question isn't related to your motivation for writing it or the importance of writing it or of any other writing. Just that oftentimes the writing becomes the focus and the essence of Zen is lost in the process.
That's right. And so if the content of the book is oriented towards, as Keisei is saying, getting you to the experience, and you can't do that, the book is not going to take you there. But getting you to make the effort and have the experience, then I think expression is being used in this proper way, if it works, and hopefully it works.
And so Mujo also has a question.
I'm wondering, I remember talking to Taiun a long time ago, and we were having a spat or something. He said something to the effect of, "You don't talk about Zen, I do." I'm wondering if you have the same opinion now.
I'm
Not
sorry.
as a fight,
No, I'm
but
sorry.
like as a fight.
Repeat that again. I kind of lost it.
We were having a debate or something like that once amongst ourselves, and I said, you said something to the effect of, "You don't talk about Zen, I do." And I'm not like picking a fight or carrying it on or something, but I'm wondering if you have the same opinion of that now.
I said that about you?
To me, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there is a social phenomenon that we see where, and this is not just my perspective on this. In fact, our late master from Berkeley, Mel Weissman, I was out there one time. I took one of his classes, and we were at a conference later at SCBA, Soto Zen Buddhist Association, and I said something to him about Dogen's complaint that people would come and try to tell him all about Zen. Master Dogen, 13th century. And Mel said, "Yeah." I said, I'm in, giving talks, and somebody in the audience raises their hand, and I call on them, and then they turn and start talking to the audience. He said, I say, talk to me. So that's probably the point I was making.
Okay.
It's considered polite, and we have etiquette being developed around online discussions like this. I confer, I'm a panelist on a monthly group out of Korea for world peace, and they have these rules of engagement they put up right away so everybody understands that you're not to start talking to each other. You want to talk to the speaker, or you want to go through the host. So it's really just as kind of a social politesse, if you will.
I think it's kind of like, though, like I feel like a lot of the times, from what I can tell from watching people, it's like, if you just kind of like throw it to them, like a lot of corporations do these days, they create a device and they send it to you with no manual whatsoever. And then the person picks up and they start doing this with it and that with it. And it's like, I think that's kind of a valuable thing.
That's why our approach is very interactive. That's one of the reasons our approach is interactive. We try to get a dialogue established with newcomers right from the beginning. so that they hear us listening to them and addressing their questions and so on.
Thank you.
I think we're wrapped up. I think we're getting signals from the powers that
We've
be
got a
here.
commercial break coming up.
Got a commercial break.
Sensei, thank you for your teaching. And everybody, thank you for your great questions and your patience in listening.
Yeah, if you have any questions about the book, please contact me by email and we can have a dialogue about it.